We played pieces like Handel's Royal Fireworks music and Shostakovich's First Symphony. At the end of camp, one of the conductors, Robert Helmsley, I heard he studied with William Vacchiano at Juilliard. I asked him if he would give me a lesson. He agreed. He gave me a 5-hour lesson on the entire opera book, no charge. I can still right now remember he and I in this room, from 10 o'clock to 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, going through exercise after exercise. That this is what this means. That's what this is what that means. This is why you work on this. This is why you play these in all the keys. This is how you jump registers. This is why it's harder to slur down than up. He was a conductor. I didn't even know he played trumpet. As a sophomore, I attended the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts. It was an experimental arts high school. My father was a jazz teacher, so I took classical music and jazz. My third teacher was the one and only, and the ever great Dr. Bert Pro. He taught us how to analyze the chorales of Johann Sebastian Bach. He taught us how to hear serial music. We listened to pieces like Penderecki's To the Victims of Hiroshima and Schoenberg's Transfigured Night. One of our classes on theme and variation was the Diabelli Variations and his analysis of Miles Davis's performance of My Funny Valentine from a 1964 live concert that he did the transcription of. This man was here, and a great teacher with deep insight into the nature of music and the truth about music. He was not ignorant, he was not prejudiced, he was not a snob. He was someone who believed in educating young people about music, and he left an indelible mark on my life. My father was always teaching us how to swing and play modern jazz. We played songs like Eddie Harris's Freedom Jazz Dance and the Brecker Brothers' Some Skunk Funk. My daddy wrote out Miles Davis's solo on Someday My Prince Will Come For Me, and he said, hey man, check this solo out and study the thematic through line. My father also encouraged me to play every gig that came down the pipe. I ended up sitting in the circus one night playing 2.5 non-stop hours because I was the youngest, dumbest one there. My father said, man, playing is the best way to learn, not talking. Play. I learned a lot of songs from him. Things like Benny Strayhorn's Lush Life. You had to learn the melody and the words. You hear the story about how Ben Webster stopped playing in the middle of a tune. And he said, what's wrong, Frog? And he said, I forgot the words. I had to learn I Can't Get Started With You, both Bunny Berrigan's version and Dizzy Gillespie's versions. At 16, I played in the New Orleans Youth Orchestra thanks to a young conductor, Gary Shelton, who started it. We played pieces like Sibelius' Second Symphony and Ravel's Bolero. Now, we sounded terrible playing all of these pieces. It's not something you want to hear, but we played them. I attended Benjamin Franklin Senior High School. Our director was Peter Dombori, Armenian. He had every kind of kiss me, I'm Armenian shirt you could imagine. He had great bands in the segregated era at Forsyth High School, but integration turned the school from white to black. That went his band. At Franklin, we played pieces like The Virgin of Macarena and the Gustav Holst Suites. He invited me to play with the New Orleans Community Band. It was comprised of older band directors and amateur musicians. We played Sousa marches like The Washington Post and pieces like Bernstein's Candide and West Side Story. We played in parks and outdoor concerts. I learned from this band the value of silence. I always loved the feeling of the silence when these older musicians, some of whom had fought in World War II, would be working on music in their spare time. I actually learned more about rehearsing from them than any of the professional ensembles I played with, because they really wanted to be there and play that music. It meant something to them. I learned about being quiet, and I talked him to death on the rides to and from my house. Every summer, I would attend Kid Jordan's summer camp at Southern University in New Orleans. We played avant-garde jazz music and followed kids' hand-conducting expressions to guide our improvisations. He always encouraged us to be more expressive. At 15, I met the great Clark Terry. He showed me how to play fast passages in swing. When I was 16, Clark was playing a gig in town. He got up early one morning to see me play Brandenburg Concerto No. 2 with the New Orleans Philharmonic. He sent me a flute horn and would periodically send postcards from Europe calling me the demon and stuff like that, generally making me feel good about my playing, even though I was generally sad. I learned Bye Bye Blackbird and the Flintstones as rhythm changes from him. My last high school teacher was the great George Jansen. To say I loved him would be an understatement. He was one of the only white teachers who would teach black students in the pre-civil rights era. He had taught John Longo, my teacher that taught me in the house and said, check out Herself and Clifford Brown. Jansen was slightly paralyzed from a stroke he had suffered and could not use his right hand. Tony just told me his father worked with Jansen. I didn't even know that because of his paralysis. George Jansen taught me all of the cornet solos like Herbert Clark's Bride of the Waves and orchestral pieces like Mahler's Fifth Symphony. I was his last student on Saturday, and all the younger kids would sit outside and listen to my lesson. One day, he very loudly threw me out for repeatedly coming in unprepared, not warmed up, after playing a funk gig all the night before. That was pure humiliation. Nothing worse than having to walk past a bunch of young kids that think you really can play, and they know you just got cussed out because they heard every word of it. This man was not supposed to drive at night, but he drove to my senior recital. That night I played Charlie Parker's Donna Lee and the Hinderman Sonata. And what I learned that night was the importance of practicing everything you have to play all the way through without stopping. Because if you don't, when it's time to do that, you won't be able to. Since that night, I always say, when you practice something, work on it, then always play it all the way through. My first ever trumpet teacher, John Fernandez, when I was 6, came to my recital when I was a senior. Every time I saw Sweets Edison, great trumpeter, played the Count Basie Orchestra and left Kansas City in the 30s, he was first in the world. He was a master of the blues and the one-liner. He would always tell me, slow down. Damn, baby boy, you just played more notes than I played in my entire career. And I've been playing since 1932. He played blues like Centerpiece and songs like I Wish I Knew. Ron Binko was the first trumpeter in the New Orleans Symphony Brass Quartet. My senior year in high school, we played about 40 gigs in elementary and middle schools. I got out of school for almost 40 days. My principal said, you can get out of school, but if you make anything less than an A, it's going to be a C or a D. We played pieces like the Cheatham Scherzo and Bach's Contrapunto's 9. Before the first concert, Ron looked at me and said, are you sure you can keep your place in this contrapunto? I said, yeah, man, I got it. I got lost. It's the first time I played with him. He started looking around. He showed me a lot of love. He said, eventually, this boy will be able to play. You need to concentrate, son. At 17, I attended Juilliard and studied with William Bacchiano. He had taught my teacher, George Jansen, and he had taught Bob Helms, who gave me that 5-hour lesson. Mr. Bacchiano and I did not get along. We were always talking about stuff like black people and Italians and all we got to kind of think about whether I was his best black trumpet player. We went back and forth. We had a hard time with each other. After about a year, I dropped out of school, a year and a half. But I called Mr. Bacchiano one day. I don't even know why I called him. I said, can I come to your home and see you? Because I want to get a lesson on transposition. I went to his house. When he answered the door in Queens, it was the first time I ever looked at him as if he was a human being, because I only knew him as Mr. Fabiano. He told me to sit down. I sat down at the table and we began to speak. He told me down the hall is my wife has been an invalid for a long time. And when she dies, I'm going to be alone. He said, now, you're going to be a great trumpet player. People will talk about you. But I'm going to tell you something that I want you to always remember. No matter how famous you get, no matter how much money you make, no matter how many other people think you're great, if you are unhappy in your internal life, you are not successful. You are living a not happy life. So the thing I want you to know is, look out for the people who are around you and make sure that everything around you has some love and some happiness. Now, this was not a man given to that type of talking. He always just called me Marsalis. It is a lesson that stays with me and has guided me many times when I wanted to strangle or kill my children. I would think, I'm serious now. I'm serious. It happened not too long ago. I wanted to kill one for leaving his keys for the 4th time. And on my way from where I was in a cab, cussing him, I thought about Fabiano. I got there, I gave him a hug. I said, man, it's just keys. His advice affected me in those ways all throughout my life. And it stays with me. I played with the New York Philharmonic, Haydn Trumpet Concerto. Mr. Fabiano came to that concert. He waited till the end. Everybody was shaking my hand and talking about we liked it. And he shook my hand. He said, Marsalis, you are my best student. So I couldn't believe it. I might not have really been his best student. It wasn't important. What was important that he remembered all those things we would argue about. He would tell me about when some kids moved his book bag because he was Italian. I was thinking about being on a whole playground, people calling you nigga, and you have to fight 4 or 5 of them. We would go back and forth. I learned a lot from him. It helped me in my life. It was not about those things that we argued about. For that, I'm forever grateful. I left Juilliard to play with Art Blakey. Art taught me to be for real and to play full out all the time, regardless of personal situations or gig conditions. We played pieces like Wayne Shorter's One by One and Bobby Watson's Full of Love. Art Blakey gave me the freedom to play and learn how to play on his bandstand. I was playing with Art Blakey at a neighborhood club in St. Louis called La Casa when Ron Carter, the band director at Lincoln High School in East St. Louis, called me to teach a class for his trumpet students. Well, I was 18 then. I said, man, I'm just 18. I can't teach them nothing. He said, man, you better get down there and teach my trumpet students. I went there and it started me on a life of going to thousands of schools around the United States of America from the impetus that was given by his confidence in me. Just this past month, his 21-year-old son, drummer Brian Carter, led a band in Jazzalinga Center's education program for middle school students in the New York City public schools. We're going to be doing 120 performances just this year for New York City public school students. Just a few years ago, one of my former students, Carlos Enriquez, taught me how to hear clave and gave me the understanding that to write Latin on a piece of music was meaningless because each groove is specific and should be identified by name. Bolero, danzón, mambo. What does Latin mean, bro? Actually, he told me, it's disrespectful and ignorant. Ali Jackson, another musician I taught as a youngster, showed me the proper way to notate Max Roach's drum pattern on Bud Powell's Un Poco Loco. I was doing an arrangement of Un Poco Loco, and I kept trying to figure out what Max was doing, and I thought I had figured it out. So I called Ali to tell him, man, I think I figured out what Max is doing. This Un Poco. He said, yeah, what is he doing? I said, something that's like a triplet. He said, no, man. It's a paradigm that's mixed up this way. Maxie showed him. This education in music is all a cycle. It's a continuum. You know, it seems like just yesterday, I was in a high school band, I was struggling to play March Grand.